Hello, I'm Reverend Rick, and it is my honor to be with you today. We really hope that this video is a blessing to you. And if it is, please consider making a donation. People watch our videos locally when they cannot necessarily come to church throughout the United States and the world. So please join us and click the link below and make a donation. Thank you, and let this be a blessing to you.
So I'm just going to ask you to take a moment with me. Take a deep breath, softening our hearts and going within. Just allowing Spirit to speak through me to you, to your hearts. Today I want to talk to you about flipping the scripts that run through our minds. Our patterns of thoughts, behaviors that keep us from living from our place of spiritual magnificence. You know, I think that sometimes the difference between a challenge and an adventure in our life really is our attitude and our perspective. For example, I spend a lot of time out driving, and quite often somebody will say to me, "Are you lost?" And I say, "No, I'm not lost. I'm exploring. I love to make U-turns." See, it's all about your perspective. We need to flip the script. Use our thoughts and our words to create a more positive and powerful experience of love on this planet. The spiritual principle that I'd like to have for this week is that you are the incarnation of Spirit. You are an expression of the divine. And the second half of the spiritual principle is that everyone is an incarnation of Spirit. Everyone is an expression of divine. Now, recently I heard a program on NPR about non-complementary behavior. And when I heard that that was being announced, I thought, well, that doesn't sound very good. We like to complement one another. Chris Hopwood, the professor at Michigan State University, is studying how people interact with each other. Specifically, one of the behaviors that he is observing is how people naturally mirror or emulate others. We meet typically warmth with warmth. Someone smiles at us, we smile back. Someone meets us with hostility, we tighten up, and we may respond with hostility. Think about road rage. Think about your coworker who disagrees with how something should be done on a project that you're working on. How do you respond to that? When we don't mirror one another, when we break this pattern of hostility or disconnect, when we break that with kindness, it's called non-complementary behavior. What Chris Hopwood is exploring is how this non-complementary behavior can be a positive change for experiences of love throughout the planet. Now, I know that we are always at choice about how to respond to a thought within our mind, a comment or situation. I can choose to either accept it as an act of love, or as we say, a call for love. But we are at choice. I believe that each one of us knows that we are an expression of the divine. Those of you who come here regularly on Sunday, you hear this over and over. That you are whole, perfect, and complete, just as you are. But I also know that I can forget this at times. I get into situations, little voices in the back of my head. You know, we all have an inner critic. It is an authority voice in our mind. Now, sometimes it is an authority for good. It keeps us, as a child, it keeps us from touching a hot stove. It keeps us from getting into situations, perhaps, that we don't want to go into. But this inner voice can also be very critical sometimes. As a matter of fact, Miguel Ruiz in The Four Agreements, he says the Toltecs have a word for these voices. He says actually it's a metote, 1,000 voices in our heads. And I think sometimes I have 1,000 voices in my head. They're all talking at me. You need to do this, you need to do that. Why did you do that? Why did you say that? When those voices get going in my head, I call them my gremlins. You remember that movie from the mid-40s, not that long, the mid-1980s? Remember that? The gremlins were these cute, cuddly, fun little critters. But there was one thing you wanted to remember. You didn't want to feed them after midnight. And you didn't want to get them wet. Right? I think that those gremlins are like our inner voices. Or our inner voices are like the gremlins. We need to be careful what we feed them. We need to be careful when we feed them. For me, my gremlins usually show up at about midnight. That's when those voices start saying, I'm reviewing the day, and why did you do that? Why did you say that? If I can stop and flip the script in my own mind, and rather than coming from a place from fear, but instead come from a place of love, loving myself. Because what I know is that those little gremlins, they feed on anger and fear and self-loathing and can just go, yeah. But if I go to a place of love, I can train that voice in my mind to speak from spirit, to speak from love and as love. I can flip the script in my own life. What I want to remember, even in the midst of whatever's happening in my daily life, is that I'm always at choice of how I want to respond to a thought in my mind, to a situation. When I have a knee-jerk reaction, what I want to do is stop. A friend of mine used to always sing the song "Stop" in the name of love, right? And then she would use that to switch the energy. We can use our creative thoughts to shift our energy as well as the energy of those around us. What I'm reminded of is that as we stumble, as we forget who we are, as we fall into that place of fear, I can learn from that. And as I move back out of that, I can resolve to talk to myself as if I was my best friend. Speaking from a place of love. Chris Hopwood shared what I thought was an amazing story about non-complementary behavior. It was, the story takes place in Bethesda, Maryland. There was a group of young adults had come together. They had recently opened one of the couples had recently opened a new restaurant. And so they were having a little backyard party to celebrate this grand opening. So there's families there, children, couples. And as one man who was telling the story accounted, he turned to his wife to say something, and suddenly he saw a gun. And there was a man standing there, and he said, I want your cash. Well, the man, Michael, who was telling the story, said, I don't have any cash. So let me ask you out there, how many of you have cash in your wallets? Oh, you're all pretty good. Because see, what he said was, I don't have any cash in my wallet, but I have credit cards, I have debit cards. You can have my wallet, but I have no cash. So the robber turned to someone else and said, give me your cash. And the person said, I don't have any either. You can have my wallet, you can have my credit card, you can have my debit card, but I don't have any cash. As you can imagine, the robber was getting a little agitated because this wasn't going real well, right? The hostess walked up to the young man who was holding the gun and said to him, I don't have any cash either, but we're here celebrating tonight. Why don't you join us and have a glass of wine? And she handed him a glass of wine. He didn't know what to do. He just kind of stood there. But then he took the glass of wine. Someone else walked up to him and said, we're celebrating the opening of a new restaurant. It's gone very well and the food is very good. Would you like to have a plate of food with us? And the young man said yes. And in a few short minutes, the man had gone from being a robber, holding them at gunpoint, to where he slipped the gun back into his pocket and he sat down and he began to talk to the people. Now, one of the things he said to them was, I guess I didn't come to the right place, did I? But you see, we would say that he went exactly to the right place, because that woman, that hostess, was able to take what was potentially a very dangerous, volatile situation, and she met it with love. She flipped the script. What she did was non-complementary behavior. Instead of meeting his hostility with any fear, she met him with love. This is our third principle. Everything is either an act of love or a call for love. No exception. She was able at that moment to choose how she was going to respond to that gun in her face. We are able to do the same thing. When we are able to stand in that place of love, when we are able to recognize that we are expressions of the divine, and that every person is also an expression of the divine, we can come from our hearts. For me, I think most of the time when I have to flip the script, what I really need to do is flip open my heart. And that's what this lady did. We would call it a call for love, an action of love. Some people might call what that lady did a miracle. But she made a conscious decision at that moment of how she was going to respond. If we want to create a world which works for everyone, and I think we do in this church, we are a very active church. This is the church that love is building. We want to spread that message of love throughout the planet. We can remember that we are the divine. And when we can't remember that, we can just look up and remember these banners. I can say, I am joy. I am love. I am beauty. I am peace. When I can remember this about myself and everyone else, I am making the planet a better place. Recently, I had the opportunity to go down to Colombia. Now, when I first realized I was going down there, someone said to me, what do you want to go down there for? There's all those drugs and everything. And I was like, sounds interesting to me. Not the drugs, but I love South America. I love Central America. So I was like all excited about going to Colombia. And when I was down there, I had this opportunity to meet this young man who was so proud and so excited about his country. Because what he told me was, he said, he goes, I bet you the first thing you heard about Colombia is that we have lots of drugs here. And I said, yes. And he said, you know what? It's true. We do have drugs here. He goes, and I bet you the other thing that you heard about our country is that the cartels are in charge. And I said, well, yeah, that's kind of the news we get. He said, I'm so proud. He goes, let me tell you what happened here. Now, for those of you who are not familiar with the history of Colombia, Colombia has been having an armed conflict from the early 1960s. Over 50 years of war in their country. Families pitted against families. Villages pitted against other villages. President Santos was elected in 2009. And he came in and he said, we've had all this conflict between the guerrillas, the FARC, rebel guerrillas, and the military. We keep having these military operations. battles. It's not working. It's not working. We need to do something different. And so this is what he did. He went and he hired, as president of the country, he went and he hired an advertising agency and said, you're going to end the war. He didn't go to his generals. He didn't go to the military. He went to an advertising agency, and he goes, this is what I want you to do. I want you to find some former FARC guerrillas, and I want you to ask them 2 questions. Why did you join the rebels in the first place, and why did you leave? President Santos was willing to do non-complementary behavior. He was no longer going to meet the aggression of the guerrillas. Rather, he wanted to try to understand them. So in talking to the former guerrillas, what they found out was 2 things. One, most of the young men joined the rebel forces because they genuinely cared about their country and they wanted to do some good in their country. What they found out once they got there was that they were just as abused and maligned as the guerrillas as what they had been by what they perceived was happening with their government. The reason they quit is because they wanted to go home. They missed their families. So Santos, he took this information, he says, okay, this is what we're going to do. He goes, we're going to have a 5-year program of operations of peace. And he had the advertising company lead this operation. Again, not his military, not his generals. So what they did, the first year, what they did was Operation Christmas. They found the paths through the jungle that were most heavily traveled by the FARC rebels. They put up motion detectors, and they put up Christmas lights, and they put up a big banner. And the big banner said, if Christmas can come to the jungle, you can come home. Christmas makes all things possible. That first year, they had about 100 people defect from the rebels and come home. The next year, they did Operation Soccer Balls. There was a big soccer tournament in Colombia, in Cartagena, and so they took thousands of soccer balls to the stadium. And they had everybody there sign them. All the famous soccer players, all the people in the stands signed these soccer balls. Then they took them up, they took them in a helicopter, they took them out to the jungle, and they dropped them down in the jungle. And the soccer balls said, let's play again. The 3rd year, they went more for the heart. The 3rd year, they got some of these little plastic orbs, little balls, and they had brothers, sisters, mothers, fathers write messages on a piece of paper, and they put them in this plastic balls with a little LED light, and one night they set thousands of these balls down the river out into the jungle where they could be picked up and they could find these messages of love. The last program that they did was called You Are My Child. It took pictures of the children, young adults who were missing, put them on a flyer. And what they asked the mothers to write on these pictures was, before you were a rebel, you were my child. I will be waiting for you, and I will always love you. After 7 years, the power of the FARC guerrillas was broken. They were willing to come to the peace table with over 700 of the rebels coming home through peace, through this activity of flipping the switch. You see, because these programs empowered the rebels to lay down their weapons and to come home. And also, just as importantly, it empowered the families to reach out and to welcome their loved ones home without any shame, without any guilt, or any repercussions. See, we admire people like Gandhi and Martin Luther King because they were able to maintain a warmth and integrity in the face of cruelty. We could admire someone like President Santos, who was brave enough to flip the script and say, this isn't working, we need to do something different. So whether it's nonviolence in India, the March on Selma, or even offering a robber a glass of wine, these are not miracles. These are examples of allowing the divine to express itself through us and as us. We can practice flipping the script every day. You have your tools. You have prayer, affirmations, meditation. You can take classes. We have some great classes being offered this summer to help you strengthen this spiritual muscle. We have practitioners in this church who are willing to sit and to pray with you and to remind you that you are a child of the divine, that you are the very essence of spirit itself. You are at choice to flip the script. So I just offer you to practice flipping the script this week. Letting go of any thoughts, beliefs, actions that no longer serve you, that keep you from exercising your spiritual discernment. We can take hold of our true spiritual selves, practicing the wisdom, the love, and the joy of the divine, and we can make a difference in this world. We can make a difference through love by letting go of that which scares us, and fear makes us fearful. So I just invite you this week, flip the script. Speak from love and as love. Let us pray. I recognize right here and right now that there is only one life. One life expressing itself as me, through me, and as each and every person in this room and on this planet. All sentient beings are of the divine. And from this place of knowing that this is my truth and the truth of all others, I seek to know the magnificence of the divine within me. When I love and forgive others, I draw upon the unconditional love of my true nature. I awaken to the new divine power within me, for there is no greater understanding, no greater expression of spirit than to know myself as an expression of love. Claiming all that is revealed to me as this child of the divine, I am filled. I seek new and creative ways to express love. With an open heart and an open mind, I awaken to the new power of spirit within me. And from this place, I am so grateful. In this place of the heart of the divine, I am so grateful for this place called the Center for Spiritual Awareness that allows us to come to be reminded of who we are. I give thanks for this place which is built on love and as love. I give thanks for Reverend Georgia and her wisdom that she imparts to us, teaches us. I give thanks on this day for the divine one. And from this place I let it go and I let it be. And so it is.